All right, good afternoon. My name is Ken Marsh. I am a benefit consultant. I specialize in Medicare and the topics around Medicare and individual insurance. And today I'm going to briefly talk about coordination of benefits and what that really means about when someone has secondary coverage, such as employer coverage. So the four topics that I'll be talking about today, first one's going to be really how Medicare works with other insurance. So in other words, if I have an employer plan or if I'm on my spouse's plan. And then the second will be who pays first. So we'll talk about a payer or a payer and who pays first in certain situations. The third would be remembering some important facts, some ideas or some components that come up all the time when someone has secondary coverage. And then the fourth would be you're eligible for Medicare. Should I take Medicare versus staying on my employer plan? So typically how Medicare will work with other insurance. If you have Medicare and other health or even drug coverage, each type of coverage is called a payer. So for example, if I'm 65 years old and I'm still working and I sign up for Medicare and I'm on the employer's plan, there's two payers involved. When there's more than one potential payer, as in the example that I just mentioned, there are coordination of rules that will decide who pays first. The first is called a primary payer, and it will pay what is owed on your bills. So in other words, the primary payer will pay the entire amount that it's obligated to pay under that benefit contract. Anything remaining, so such as deductibles or out-of-pocket expenses, would then be picked up by the secondary payer. There can even be a third payer in some cases. So for example, if I have employer coverage and Medicare, and let's say I'm in a car accident or a workers' comp accident, there could be a third payer as well. And it's really important if you have any part of Medicare, if you have more than one health insurance in place, to tell all of your doctors, certainly if you're hospitalized, all of your healthcare providers about all of your different coverages, because this can really create a lot of confusion if and when it comes to claim time, if your providers are not aware that there are other payers involved. So it comes down to who pays first and then who pays second. So if you are a retiree, let's say you've worked for a company for many, many years, and as a benefit, the company is providing retiree insurance for you. Medicare is primary. So if this applies to you, it's critical that you also enroll in Medicare, both parts A and B, because if you don't, then you don't have primary insurance. This actually catches people by surprise oftentimes because the coverage that they have under retiree benefit is oftentimes it's exactly the same type of benefit that they had while they were working. But as soon as they become a retiree, that plan switches to a secondary type of payer and Medicare becomes first. This next item here is pretty common. So if I'm 65 years or older and I have group health coverage either under myself or my spouse, and the employer has 20 or more employees, the group health plan will be primary. So this comes up all the time. 65 plus, continue to work. My employer has 20 employees. My employer plan is primary. I could theoretically not even sign up for Medicare at that point, but in most cases, it makes complete sense to sign up for at least one part of Medicare, which is Part A. But if I'm 65 or older and I still have employer coverage, but the employer has less than 20 employees, Medicare becomes primary. And so just like in that example of the retiree coverage or the retiree benefit, if I'm working for an employer that has under 20 and I'm 65 or older, or my spouse is 65 or older, if I don't sign up for Medicare, I don't have primary coverage. And this would create huge gaps in that situation when it comes to claim time. Disability happens, people will be moved to Medicare based on certain disabilities or when they are receiving Social Security disability benefits. And if I'm under 65 and are disabled, so if I've been receiving Social Security disability, how this works is if I'm eligible for Social Security disability, there's a 4-month waiting period. And then for a period of 24 months, I will be kind of in a waiting period. And after that, I become eligible for Medicare. So when that happens, if I'm under 65, if I'm working for an employer that has 100 or more employees, the employer plan is primary. So in the example above, if I have Medicare and I'm just aging into Medicare and my employer has 20, the employer plan is primary. But in the case of disability, that threshold is increased to 100. So then conversely, if I'm with an employer that has under 100 employees, Medicare pays first. And again, it's critical that that individual sign up for all parts of Medicare. Otherwise, they don't have primary coverage. If someone has end-stage renal disease, which is permanent kidney failure, so if someone is taking or requiring dialysis, if they're on a transplant list, they're automatically moved to Medicare. So within 4 months of being diagnosed with permanent kidney failure, they are enrolled and moved to Medicare. However, Medicare always has a 30-month delay before Medicare becomes primary. So regardless of the employer size, whether it's under 100, over 100, if I'm moved to Medicare due to end-stage renal disease, yes, I have Medicare, but Medicare is secondary for that entire 30 months, regardless of the size of the employer. And then for folks that have marketplace coverage, once they turn 65, Medicare immediately becomes primary. And so those individuals obviously no longer have individual insurance as their primary coverage, and then they need to also go to Medicare as well. So some things to remember. So the insurance that pays first is called the primary payer, and it will pay up to the limits of coverage. So it's not, in other words, it's not a percentage of the amount that they would typically have paid. It's the entire amount. They're primary, they pay the entire thing. And then if there's any leftover in the form of deductibles or co-insurance that the member is responsible for, that's where the secondary payer could pick up some of those expenses. The one that pays second, secondary payer, only pays if there are costs that the first payer didn't cover. So not necessarily the second payer is going to pay every time. Remember, secondary payer, it could be an employer plan, it could be Medicare. It really depends on the situation, the number of employees, if there's an employer plan in place, and it might not pay all of the uncovered costs. If Medicare is the primary payer and your employer is the secondary payer, you have to join Medicare Part B. So before, in other words, if you don't have Medicare Part B, you will not have that primary initial coverage up front. And then these are some areas to keep in mind when you do reach 65 and theoretically become eligible for Medicare. One of the first things that you need to find out is if your plan that you have through an employer or your spouse's employer is creditable for prescription coverage known as Part D. If it's not, you really should enroll into Medicare. If your employer has fewer than 20s, I've talked about that you have to enroll in Medicare because Medicare is primary for that individual. If you're contributing to a health savings account, once you turn 65, it doesn't mean you have to go to Medicare in this case, but there are strict rules regarding contributing to a health savings account when you become eligible for Medicare. And so, for example, let's say someone turns 65, they work for an employer, and the employer offers a high deductible health plan, and that individual continues to contribute to a health savings account. And let's say that individual enrolls when they're 66 into Medicare. A lot of people don't realize this, but Medicare has a retro enrollment provision, and they'll go back up to 6 months. So you cannot contribute to an HSA when you have any form of Medicare. And so therefore, if that situation applies to you, you have to time your contributions to stop them at least 6 months prior to when you would retire and go to Medicare. And then also, what are my out-of-pocket costs? Comparing my employer coverage to Medicare. So if I have an employer and they have 20 employees or more, I have the option. I can go to Medicare, I can stay on my employer plan. But in some cases, it's better for the individual to go to Medicare. You know, Medicare doesn't have the out-of-pocket deductibles, doesn't have the out-of-pocket expenses, and in many cases pays much quicker and sooner than a group plan would pay that would be subject to deductibles and co-insurance and things like that. So these are the items that I wanted to briefly talk about today. My information is listed here, and if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me either by calling me or sending me an email, and always happy to have a conversation with you. There's never a cost to any Infinity client that has questions regarding Medicare and how that works for their employees. So I want to thank you for your time today, and I hope you have a great day.